James, thank you for your service, Veterans Day.
I only did 2 years. I'm not really a veteran. I don't get any accolades.
You don't get the license plate?
I guess technically, but then I have to explain, like, yeah, I was in, but not that long, so I didn't kill anybody.
I get in a bit of... it's kind of one of my bugaboos, I guess, is people that get the license plate and they spent like 3 years in Kansas studying radio. It's like, yeah, I guess technically, but really are you? Actually, I've gotten in an argument recently. Somebody I know, they hurt themselves in basic training as a female. Hurt their feet in basic training. And they're been out of the military for some time to get it checked because of it. And I just kind of was pointing out that it was other people that were supporting that idea, and I was pointing out the hypocrisy on, supporting her. She's fine. Her feet hurt on occasion because she was wearing too tight of boots. But you think it's okay for her to get a disability check for the rest of her life, but somebody that, getting food stamps is an issue. It's just, this country, I guess it's probably like this a lot of places, but this country, we really fetishize veterans to a sick degree. And people often use that fetishization for pretty nefarious means. This is the type of stuff that's kind of co-opted to support the military-industrial complex. We got to support the military. How are we going to do that? We're going to give a bunch of money to Raytheon. Okay, well, but the troops, remember the troops. Anyways.
Well, typically when it comes time to vote on issues that could bolster social support services for veterans, they get voted down,
Yeah, that's the crazy thing.
They don't care about the veterans after they get out of the war. They just care about the war.
Yeah, that was, I remember 2012, I want to say, I guess like the 2012 election cycle, and Mitch McConnell, it was some deal or another, Mitch McConnell just kept hammering though, got to support the troops, we got this bill to support the troops, got to support the troops, and they were trying to, it was like a presidential election cycle, and it was also, they had some big budget bill that they were trying to pass, and it's the first time I became aware of this. And they broke down the budget bill, and it was just all giveaways to defense contractors while they were cutting like mental health services and for actual soldiers and like basing, housing funding and stuff like that. It's like, no, this is exactly not for the troops. This is for defense contractors. You're cutting money for the actual people that are serving and need the money, but it's what happens when you fetishize a certain group of people. So,
the military in our country is there's a really clear delineation among classes in the military. You have the officers and you have the enlisted. And the enlisted are people that, are at the end of their ropes. They don't have any better option than to take, a gut job at the military where they might potentially die. That's what it all is. It's really poor kids, from the city. That's why I joined. I had lost my job, failed a drug test for smoking pot. I had no alternative, really. I had no money coming in. I said, hey, screw it, I'll join the military. That's what a lot of these kids do, man. It's the best potential job they can get, really. You can retire in 20 years, have free health care while you're in, they take care of you. Get training, free education. It's almost like living in a decent country.
Is there any shocking doubt? The same people that would vote to cut defense $177 billion, the same ones that would put homos in the military, the same ones that would not fund BRAC, the same ones that would not clear up. No, I will not. Sit down, you socialist.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman, parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman. Do we
I think I've seen this before. Yeah, it is.
If he's not one?
Committee will be in order.
Mr. Chairman.
The gentlewoman from Colorado is recognized. And the gentleman from Vermont is recognized.
Well, the gentleman from California, is he still here or has he disappeared?
For what purpose does the gentleman from Vermont rise?
I rise to speak in support of the amendment.
The gentleman from Vermont.
I wonder if I could question the gentleman from California. I am rising in support of the amendment.
The chair is in charge. The chair is speaking. The gentleman from Vermont has been recognized for a period of 5 minutes, and you may now proceed.
I thank the chairman very much. Would like the opportunity, if the gentleman from California would respond. Just to ask him a brief question, if I might.
Calls him out right here, dude. This is epic.
Now, my
Bernie's
ears
a
may
boss.
have been playing a trick on me, but I thought I heard the gentleman a moment ago say something, quote unquote, about homos in the military. Was I right in hearing that expression?
Absolutely. Putting homosexuals in the military.
You said something about homos in the military. Was the gentleman referring to the many thousands and thousands of gay people who have put their lives on the line in countless wars defending this country? Was that the group of people that the gentleman was referring to?
I'm talking about the military. People in the military do not support.
That's not what we were talking about. You used the word homos in the military. You are.
That's where the music stops, and then like Snoop Dogg starts playing. The glasses drop from the top, and the blunt goes in his mouth. Damn, it feels good to be a gangster.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. Did you say homos in the military?
Homos in the military. It sucks that he's too old now.
I know everybody's too old, man. We need a new crop.
Yeah.
I guess AOC, but nobody likes her anymore.
It takes time. I think if she, you can go one of two ways. You can AOC could. I mean, Pelosi started off kind of like an AOC type figure. She seemed to really have these radical left-wing progressive ideas kind of come out of the Haight-Ashbury, I mean, not quite Haight-Ashbury, but like the San Francisco progressive left-leaning movement. And then,
it's the DNC, dude. The DNC is so fucking corrupt. There's so much corporate money flowing through the DNC.
Yeah, she just become corrupted by the process, or you could turn like Bernie and put those years in and become man of character.
The problem with Bernie is when you're the only person calling people out for corruption, it doesn't stick, man. You can't be you just sound like the crazy old man. Nobody else is saying shit about corporate corruption in the government, publicly.
Yeah,
New York Times certainly isn't writing exposés on this shit. I mean, you have to go to the Intercept to read about Joe Manchin being an oil baron. Anyway, let's get into this. This started with a question I was sort of wondering the other day. The United States media and government apparatus tends to condemn countries they don't like. There's no rhyme or reason to it. Like, why are we friends with, like, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, the countries that we typically think of when we talk about modern socialism? We're friends with them, but for some reason Venezuela is evil and communist dictatorship. And so I wanted to go into that a little bit today, take a look at both sort of examples.
Norway, the world's happiest country, now has a new reason to be cheerful. The value of the Scandinavian nation's sovereign wealth fund has reached an unprecedented $1 trillion after outperforming all initial expectations. Known locally as the Oil Fund, it was established over 20 years ago in order to invest long-term revenue from oil extraction and set aside money for future generations. Measured in US dollars, the fund's value has increased due to higher climbing stock markets and a strengthening of the world's major currencies against the dollar.
So Norway nationalized their entire oil industry to support social welfare programs, and the U.S. didn't invade or bomb them. Pretty insane when you think about our track record. I mean, that's why we overthrew the government of Iran. That's why we got pissed off at Hussein. That's why the list goes on, and we'll get into a little bit of it. But
yeah, well, I guess maybe we will. But who owned the companies before they were nationalized? Let's say Norway, for example. I mean, were they all domestic companies that were nationalized by the government? I'm assuming it wasn't ExxonMobil, is what I'm getting at. The oil-rich country nationalized the resource in 1972.
Okay.
2 years. This is 2 years after foreign companies started exploring oil off Norway's coast. So I guess they were domestic companies, and then some foreign companies started coming in, and then they nationalized it shortly after.
Well, a lot of the social programs in the Norwegian countries in general started in the 30s during the worker movements in the world. Finland, in fact, was a Soviet Socialist republic initially until they refused to join the USSR, and the USSR didn't invade like they did some of the other countries, and Finland became an independent country at that point. But there's a lot of influence there still, So basically, the
Gut torment.
he's from Norway.
Yeah, I mean that's what they look like, right?
They all look like that.
Yeah, they all just out there nationalizing,
working on the oil rigs.
Yeah, working the oil rigs, farming giants.
So, Nordic model is characterized by, for one, an elaborate social safety net. Free healthcare and free education are the mainstays of a decent social safety net. They have the highest levels of democracy in the world, according to the Democracy Index, which is somewhat accurate. They have a very high trade union density. 90% trade union density in Iceland, 88.8% in Finland, 88% in Sweden, 82% in Denmark, and somewhat lower, 69% in Norway. In the United States, the trade union density is 11%. So quite a differentiation there between the Nordic countries and the United States in particular. They are a mixed market economy, so they do have free market capitalism, but they do have anti-competition laws that they actually enforce, so preventing monopolies. They have a large public sector. Many sectors of the industry are wholly or partially state-run or owned, and that includes utilities, airlines, railroads, electronics, steel. And they have nationalized key resources, like we were just talking about in Norway with the Sovereign Wealth Fund. And they have low levels of inequality. Their top income earners also have a lower income per capita than the United States. They also have lower levels of poverty. They are less than half of the United States, and that's net after redistribution. So they're just kind of better in every way for the average person. The only situation where it would be better to live in the United States is if you're at the top 1%, essentially, in terms of standard of living and happiness and whatnot. Their world leaders are historically famous for having low levels of corruption. There is an index for that. I'm not sure exactly what the specifications are, and they have high levels of public spending. Half of their GDP goes to public works projects and other public spending. So it doesn't go to private companies, unlike the U.S., where the majority of our budget goes to private companies like Caterpillar and Boeing and so on. In the Nordic countries, half of their GDP roughly goes to actual public spending. They have a relatively high tax burden compared to the U.S., and their taxes are fairly flat. And some people could see that as a potential downside if the poorest sections of society are paying more in taxes. But you also have to take into account the things they don't have to pay for: education, health care. And you also have to realize that high-income taxpayers in the U.S. Receive tons of tax breaks and loopholes and so on. And the reason they are able to do all this is because the Social Democrats have ran the region since the 30s, basically. For decades and decades, they had power until the USSR fell, basically. The neoliberals did roll some of this back and deregulated a bit, but a lot of the policies are still there. And Norway in particular, I wanted to talk about a little bit. The government owns part of many major companies, similar to, for example, the People's Republic of China. It's a similar situation where they don't necessarily need to regulate as harshly because the government itself owns a percentage of a lot of companies. And in Norway, they operate the Sovereign Wealth Fund, which they pay for by nationalizing their oil industry, which we learned a minute ago, is over $1 trillion. It's worth over $1 trillion now, their Sovereign Wealth Fund.
Okay. So about that, so with the I guess lower levels of regulation, the idea is that because the government owns the company is not behaving in such a way that would necessitate regulations. Is this the idea behind it?
The books are open to the government because the government is a shareholder, a major shareholder, sits on the board, and so on.
Okay, so there's I guess maybe more public accountability, transparency in how the businesses, because the government is a shareholder, and how the business operates, and therefore less room for shadiness to go on and enrichment or I guess, kind of exploitation of the people working there.
Yeah, it makes a big difference when people. It makes a big difference when people can see what's going on.
Well, sure.
I don't want to go into it too much, but in China, it's a bit different. They have what they call the National Bourgeoisie, which they allow a number of rich people, but they basically keep their thumb on them. They don't let them run roughshod over the country, over the government. And Norway sort of modeled that situation prior to China doing it, so they sort of take credit for that. So they say. But Norway is the only major economy in the Western world in which younger generations are getting richer. So the millennials are actually in a better financial situation than the generations preceding them. And that is unique to Norway in the West.
Jeez.
The Nordic Model. What do you think?
Sounds like a winner to me. I've kind of been fascinated with this ever since I first started learning about it. I mean, it's basically the proof in the pudding for people like myself that the policies that I kind of advocate for could, in theory, work. And obviously, I'm sure there's a lot of things in Norway that couldn't be replicated here necessarily, but in theory, it shows that these practices won't lead to the downfall of civilization like many conservatives would argue. So.
And it's cool to see a region like the Norwegian countries that have sort of modeled the social democratic model and tried to make it successful, and have been very successful with it.
So is this Norway, famously one of the places left on earth that has a monarchy? Is this what you're advocating for? We need a king, and
technically, yes. What do they call it?
Is it a constitutional monarchy?
There you go. Yeah, they have a Congress. Proportional representation. They're the highest in the world on the democracy index for a reason. All right.
Yeah, it is weird though. Like you have, kind of the last vestiges of medieval style government going hand in hand. Obviously, like it really doesn't have any power. It's all mostly ceremonial, and kind of the new. I don't know. I wonder if there's something to that. They have a monarchy, and they have some of the most forward-thinking, progressive policies in the world. Also, they're going hand in hand.
I think it's a combination of factors. I think it's a combination of the fact that they didn't get subsumed into the USSR, for one, and for two, they weren't subject to colonialism from the West. And those two factors led to a lot of independence in the region.
I guess, they didn't really become kind of a leading economic power until, like, really after World War II, is my understanding. So not only were they not subject to colonialism, but they weren't really a power that could participate in it themselves.
That's not totally true, but
is it not true?
No, Norway in particular has interest in Africa right now. I don't know what the situation was then, but they certainly
are the interests. They're post World War II though, right? They're not
correct. Yeah,
they weren't participating in like the turn of the century colonialism.
Not that I know of.
Yeah. That's what I was getting.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you are interested in nootropics, check out my website. We are still running free shipping through the fall. Time is almost up, though, guys. If you have been thinking about trying nootropics, try them now. Go to my website, MetamaxPerformance.com.
Ladies and gentlemen, Shire Hemp Farms, your number one source for CBD and Delta 8 products, along with other ethnobotanicals, ginseng, yellow root. Come check us out. We've got great prices on all our products. We have a new podcast discount code. This is ESPODWIN. Winter. Winter's coming. Get your Delta 8. Stay home on a cold day and come check us out. ShireHempFarms.com.
So let's talk a little bit about Hugo Chavez and the Chavez model.
I think that the first people who should
This is 2006 at the UN, and he's holding a Chomsky book here.
read this book are our brothers and sisters in the United States, because their threat is in their own house. The devil is right at home. The devil himself is right in the house. And the devil came here yesterday.
Still stinks of sulfur.
Yesterday,
Classic.
the devil came here. Right here. Right here. And it smells of sulfur still today. This
Of course, this is Chavez 4 years after the first coup attempt.
Guy's got swagger.
Should have seen him in his younger days, man.
Oh, I bet.
He's jacked. So, Chavismo, this is the movement of Chavez, basically. But this is social democracy. It's similar. They do have private property in Venezuela. Even under Chavez, there's no restriction on private property. They do have social safety net programs, very similar. They are also under this rubric of Bolivarianism. This was the revolutionary figure during the independence of South America. This is a nationalism stemming from this independence movement from Spain and Portugal and the other countries of Europe. In addition, he is also a Trotskyist, and his wife was a Trotskyist, and it sort of gives his rhetoric a bend more than anything. It doesn't really affect his policy decisions too much, except in the way he treats other countries, I think. So Trotskyism, if you don't know, is Leninism, basically. But this was with a critical eye to Stalin in particular in the USSR. Not any specific policies, really, but Trotsky just sort of didn't like Stalin and was an anti-Stalinist for his own publicity, in my opinion. But
if the whole idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat inevitably leads to just the dictatorship, whether it has democratic support at the beginning, it's kind of irrelevant if the democratic support is going to slowly erode or just be manufactured.
The problem is you have to sort of, the people in power in the Communist Party, say, of China now, let's talk about, or you could talk about the USSR Politburo also. You have to sort of trust that they have their best intentions, right? Fuck that. I'll take the Nordic social model. I'll take the Nordic model over that, but
sure.
This is 2021. We have different ideas these days, right? In terms of socialism.
For sure.
So in Venezuela, he established these communal councils. These are municipal councils, basically, that I advocate for. These are neighborhood-based elected councils. They're funded by the government, and many were armed after multiple coup attempts. And I would characterize these as similar to the CDR in Cuba, but they're also sort of like the city council. They plan local projects, and they submit funding requests to the federal government, and they receive a lot of funding, actually. They do a lot of good work in Venezuela. And in fact, the federal government, 1/50th of their entire budget goes to these communal councils. Pretty good chunk of change there for basically municipal governments. They established communal banks which approve microloans for small businesses. This is similar to the idea that we want to do in the United States with postal banking, allow for everybody to have access to a bank, of some kind, so they don't have to go to payday lenders and shit. His social programs are called Bolivarian missions. He has a bunch of these. Their social programs started under Hugo Chavez. They provide free medical coverage. These are basically councils that he empowers to do these things. So one council is trying to provide affordable food for people. There's a council that is working to increase literacy in adults, because a lot of adults are illiterate due to lack of education under prior administrations. There are councils providing free post-education, constructing new low-income housing for the unhoused. They are working on restoring indigenous rights in the region. So access to native lands and I don't know what all, indigenous rights, but I'm not into that stuff too much to really comment on it. But there are councils that are working on land reform. This is where they collectivize large swaths of land owned by companies or like rich people and give them, break them up and give that land to poor peasants to basically farm, to become subsistence farmers or to do whatever they want with them. There are councils developing rural areas. So this is building infrastructure in basically out in the country where there is none to raise the standard of living. And they are preserving nature, protecting the rainforest and whatnot. Now, that's all good and everything, but what's wrong with Chavez? What's the problem? He is in strong opposition to neoliberal policies, and including being a vocal critic of the United States, and in particular U.S. foreign policy. He spoke out in support of Castro and Morales, Ortega, and other leftist governments that the U.S. doesn't like. And he's been an outspoken critic of the World Bank and IMF programs. This is the neocolonialism where what they essentially do is they go to developing nations. They say, hey, we'll loan you all this money. In return, you have to cut all your social programs.
Austerity?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Austerity. That is Chavismo. Very similar, right? It's really just rhetoric that puts him in opposition to the U.S.
Yeah, sure.
And being allied with Cuba, because Cuba, the reason we invaded and arrested Noriega is because he broke the Cuba embargo. He spoke out against the U.S. invasions of Iraq and Libya. He also orchestrated a coalition of Central and South American countries with this Petrocaribe. This was an oil agreement among Central and South American countries. And he founded Telesur, of course, to counter the capitalist media narratives in the region, largely, responsible for the many coup attempts against him. It's crazy how much media coverage money will buy you anywhere in the world.
Yeah, so, the question is, so why the different treatment from one to the other, from Norway to Venezuela?
What's the difference? Why didn't we sanction Norway when they nationalized oil?
Well, okay, so I think one thing to point out, who's the leader of Norway? Nobody knows.
Well,
nobody's ever known.
Or was.
Exactly. They don't know what they're doing. That's what I'm saying. No, it's I think there's something to be said when you have these kind of left-wing policies and you have a charismatic guy sitting at the top that tends to linger in power. It's kind of an old trope for things that are going to go downhill. The social reforms, everything starts off great, but then the charismatic, that kind of throws alarm bells in my head. You got a guy at the top, and he's holding on to power, and where are things going to go from here? I don't know how relevant that is, but it could just be different styles. European styles more, I guess, you'd be an anonymous public servant. Where in South America, going back to Bolivar, Simon de Bolivar. I don't know how you pronounce it, but. This kind of charismatic man that takes control and leads his people out of oppression and colonialism into the great new future.
Is it your argument that because he's a figurehead or because he's an authoritarian, you think?
Because he's an authoritarian.
Sure. Okay.
But yeah, so because he's an authoritarian, because he has, it's less about the government he created than it's him creating it, not here's this thing I'm helping put out there, and then it's just going to be out there, and then you, the people, democratically do with it what you want. No, I'm going to be sitting up here on the top making sure that you do this democratically the way I think it needs to be done democratically.
Well, he was elected in free and fair elections, certified by everybody as free and fair.
Initially, right? I mean, did they continue to be like that? Did they?
Yes. His elections, Maduro, there are some questions. He's going down a slightly more authoritarian road, but in general, the reason people say that about Chavez and don't like Chavez is because he wrote the new constitution and put it to a referendum. It was voted 77% approval. So he changed the constitution but it was a democratic process.
Okay,
and he did extend the presidential terms, but we used to have in the United States, we had 3. FDR was in there for 3 terms.
Yeah.
And an argument can be made that term limits are anti-democratic, frankly, if you really want to argue that point.
Yeah, you could. But, I think probably the big thing is probably where the places are situated. So, the relationship that we've had historically with European countries has obviously been significantly, especially Western, Northern European countries, has always been quite a bit different than countries that fall in the sphere. That Northern and Western Europe were our allies and our friends.
The colonial countries.
Post World War II. Yeah, they were some of them were colonial countries, but post World War II, those were our allies in rebuilding the world. South America is under our sphere of influence. This is the Monroe Doctrine we talked about previously. So I think it's just the relationship that we had to those places. And then last, and this kind of falls into what I was just talking about. Norway was a founding member of NATO too, so it's hard to be antagonistic towards somebody. I guess if you're in the same, friend group.
Sure.
Norway is in our top 8 on MySpace, I guess is what I'm saying, right up there with mine.
It's sort of like France, right? France is very democratic. I mean, they'll throw a freaking general strike at the drop of a hat in France. They don't care, dude.
Yeah.
We pissed them off. We'll snub them on like nuclear deals. The nuclear sub deal will snub them, but publicly we have to pretend like we're friendly with them at least.
Rename our French fries freedom fries.
Yeah. Let's look at a Chomsky clip, because why not? Or listen to it. This is Chomsky on Ralph Nader's show in... let me look up the date. It says 2019.
Economy. The U.S. has been running Venezuela for a century. Since it kicked out the British under Woodrow Wilson. When oil was discovered, the U.S. expelled Britain unceremoniously and essentially took over the country. And since then, it's been pretty much dominating it. Lots of hideous atrocities. Don't have to go through that. But one effect was that the economy was almost entirely based on oil. Now, one of Chavez's errors was not to change that. The economy is still overwhelmingly based on oil. It was not diversified. A second error, here I'm quoting the chief opposition economist, Francisco Rodriguez. That's a spokesman for the opposition, serious economist. He says a serious error of the Chavez government was not to put aside reserves during the period of high oil prices, rather to spend the reserves. They were spent on social programs and others inside the country. They were spent on internationalist efforts to, say, provide cheap oil to Haiti, which obviously can barely survive, and many others. Also,
just a little bit of it there. It's a good interview if you ever get a chance to listen to it. I haven't watched any other of Nader's show, though, so I don't know if it's any good. I heard he was kind of off on the deep end, but I don't know. So he's just basically going through a little bit of the colonialist history and the U.S. involvement there. Yeah, like you said, it's in their sphere of influence. It's the Monroe Doctrine. And there have been a ton of these coup attempts. There are figures involved in this coup and others, including Mark Rubio, Mike Pence, and the President of Colombia. So this is high-level figures. This is what you always talk about when it comes to these geopolitical issues. They are in OPEC country, of course. Other countries in OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, include Iran, Kuwait, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. Notice anything about these countries? Any through lines here? Except for Saudi Arabia, I guess.
They all have excellent music? I don't know. What is it?
They're all the subject of multiple U.S. invasions / coups / And the fear I have is that Venezuela is sort of next, right?
Yeah.
The next invasion. They have a lot of bombs to blow up somewhere.
Some article had come out recently about a general that was working at the DOD. I think it was tied in with Afghanistan, and people there were saying, like, hey, this is our excuse to go into Venezuela and Iraq, and this is, I guess, like it was like right after 9/11, and they were already talking about how this was going to be an excuse to go to Venezuela.
Oh, really? Back then?
Yeah, I guess they'd had plans on the table, according to this article.
I told you, under Pompeo was talking about invading. Under Trump, they just didn't. I'm not sure. Maybe the coronavirus pandemic maybe put a halt to that. I mean, relations warmed up a little bit under Obama between Cuba and the U.S. and between Venezuela and the U.S., but then it just took a turn for the worst. Norway has oil, but not enough oil, I guess.
Not enough oil, and yeah, I guess. I mean, if they had enough oil, they'd be members of OPEC, right? And that's just kind of how it works.
Right, I guess so.
Within the country, things are going to be quite, obviously, like if you're living in Venezuela versus living in Norway, your experience as a citizen is going to be pretty different. That's kind of the same policies. They got the same theme, but.
Well, Norway's developed.
But yeah, Norway's developed too. But on the outside, it's not making to a different country, relations with those two countries should be essentially the same. You have these nationalized, both of them are large oil producers, they're nationalized, they're being dealt with. So
big social safety net,
Yeah.
See, Norway's not out there talking shit. Don't talk shit. You won't get.
That's what it is.
Don't
talk shit and have a beautiful bikini team. Very important. Tall blonde women makes everybody happy.
Appreciate you coming on for the bonus show this week.
Yep. See you in a couple days. Peace.
Yep. See you this weekend. Later, man.